You settle into your resting place now, perhaps adjusting your pillow, perhaps letting your shoulders sink gently downward, as though the weight of the day is slowly dissolving into the quiet evening air. You have arrived in a peaceful corner of storytelling, a place where history does not rush, where memories move slowly, like leaves drifting across calm water, and where you are free to simply listen and rest. Tonight, you are invited to travel far across oceans and time, to a land shaped by rivers that shimmer like polished jade, to valleys where morning mist lingers lovingly across rice terraces, and to villages where generations once moved in harmony with the steady breathing of the earth. You find yourself in Vietnam, long before the world would learn its name through the language of war. Here, the air feels warm and fragrant with growing things. The soil beneath your feet feels soft and fertile, nourished for thousands of years by the patient flow of the Red River in the north, and the mighty Mekong River in the south. You walk slowly beside one of these rivers, the surface smooth and reflective, like memory itself. You hear wooden oars dipping rhythmically into the water. Fishermen guide narrow boats across the current, their movements unhurried, practiced through generations of quiet repetition. You notice the gentle rustling of bamboo groves swaying in the breeze. Bamboo is strong yet flexible, has long symbolized the spirit of the Vietnamese people. It bends when storms arrive, but it rarely breaks. As you continue walking, you notice small villages emerging along the riverbanks. The houses are built from wood and thatch, raised slightly above the earth to welcome cooling air beneath them. Smoke curls lazily from cooking fires, carrying the delicate scent of simmering rice and herbs. Children run barefoot along narrow dirt paths, their laughter light and effortless. Elders sit beneath shaded verandas, telling stories of ancestors, stories carried not in books, but in memory, passed from voice to voice like heirlooms made of sound. You begin to notice something comforting. Life here moves in rhythm with nature. The planting of rice follows the monsoon rains. The harvest follows the golden arrival of autumn sunlight. Families gather during festivals that honor both ancestors and the living world around them. And as you listen closely, you hear the ancient rhythm of Vietnam, a rhythm that will echo softly beneath everything that follows in this story. For centuries, this land has been shaped by waves of influence, some gentle, some turbulent. Long before distant empires turned their eyes toward Southeast Asia, Vietnam had already experienced cycles of conquest and independence. The first state, the Van Lang state, was established in the Red River Delta around the 7th century BC. This was built upon the foundations of the Dong Sun culture, noted for its elaborate bronze casting, especially the distinctive bronze drums. Following the Han conquest of Nanyue in 111 BC, much of northern and central Vietnam came under Chinese dominance for more than 1,000 years. Northern dynasties from China once extended their rule here, bringing Confucian philosophy, administrative systems, and new artistic traditions. Yet even during those long centuries, Vietnamese identity remained deeply rooted in its own soil, nourished by village traditions, local beliefs, and an unbreakable connection to land and family. You pause beside a rice field now. Farmers stand ankle-deep in cool water, carefully planting young rice shoots in neat, endless rows. Their conical hats shield them from the sun, creating reflections across the flooded field that resemble floating moons. You notice how peaceful the scene feels, how steady and dependable. And it is this steadiness, this ancient rhythm, that will one day be disrupted. In the south, Vietnam was engaged in a centuries-long process of territorial expansion, known as Nam Tien, southward march, absorbing the land of the Kingdom of Champa and eventually expanding into the Mekong Delta, which was historically settled by the Khmers. However, by the 16th century, the feudal regime showed weakness, leading to civil wars and the country being effectively divided into northern and southern domains in the 17th and 18th centuries. As the 19th century slowly unfolds, you begin to feel a distant shift, like a storm forming far beyond the horizon. European ships begin appearing along Vietnam's coastline. Their sails are tall and foreign, their intentions carried quietly beneath the language of trade, religion, and empire. By the mid-1800s, France begins extending its colonial influence across Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, forming what would become known as French Indochina. The French invasion began in 1858, using the pretext of protecting religious freedom and trade. You walk now through the streets of a growing colonial city, perhaps Saigon in the south, or Hanoi in the north. The architecture begins to change around you. French-style boulevards appear. Government buildings rise with European elegance. Catholic churches ring their bells across neighborhoods where Buddhist temples have stood for centuries. You notice Vietnamese workers constructing roads, railways, and plantations, often under difficult conditions. French administrators introduce new systems of taxation, new schools teaching European languages, new economic structures centered around exporting rice, rubber, and minerals. Some Vietnamese families adapt cautiously, sending children to colonial schools, learning new professions, navigating this unfamiliar social structure. But beneath the surface, a quiet longing begins to grow, a longing not for rebellion yet, but for dignity, for cultural preservation, and for self-determination. You begin to sense that history, like a river, is gathering pressure upstream. As the early 20th century approaches, Vietnam becomes a place where ideas begin to flow more rapidly. Young scholars travel abroad, returning with new philosophies about independence, socialism, and nationalism. Secret discussion circles form in cities and villages. Pamphlets circulate quietly between friends. Among these emerging voices, one figure slowly rises into historical memory, a thoughtful and determined young man who would later become known to the world as Ho Chi Minh. Born in central Vietnam, he travels across continents, observing global politics, colonial struggles and revolutionary movements. You imagine him standing on distant docks, listening, learning, absorbing the language of independence that echoes across the early 1900s. Meanwhile, life within Vietnam continues, balancing tradition and change. Farmers still tend their rice paddies. Markets still bustle with silk, fruit, and spices. Ancestors are still honored with incense and offerings. Yet beneath daily life, quiet questions are beginning to ripple through communities. Who decides the future of this land? Who speaks for the river, the fields, the villages? Then, as the 1940s arrive, the world itself begins trembling beneath global conflict. World War II spreads across continents, and Vietnam finds itself caught between fading French colonial authority and the expanding presence of Japanese occupation forces. You walk through villages where uncertainty now lingers like morning fog that refuses to lift. Crops are sometimes seized. Transportation routes shift under military control. Food shortages begin to appear in certain regions. And still, families gather each evening, lighting small lamps, cooking whatever meals they can prepare, telling children stories of resilience and patience. During this time, nationalist movements gain momentum. The Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, organizes resistance efforts aimed at achieving Vietnamese independence. Their movement blends political ideology with powerful emotional appeal, promising freedom, unity, and self-governance. When World War II finally ends in 1945, a fragile moment of possibility arrives. The Japanese surrender creates a sudden power vacuum. In Hanoi, Vietnamese nationalists declare independence on September 2, 1945, envisioning a unified nation standing proudly among the world's free countries. For a brief, shimmering moment, hope feels close enough to touch. But history, like the river during monsoon season, rarely flows in straight lines. France, determined to restore its colonial authority, begins reasserting control over Vietnam. Negotiations falter. Trust dissolves. And gradually, the First Indochina War begins unfolding between French forces and the Viet Minh. You now find yourself walking through forests and mountain trails where guerrilla fighters move quietly through dense jungle paths. Their sandals press softly against wet leaves. Their camps are hidden beneath thick canopies where sunlight filters through in scattered golden beams. The war stretches across nearly a decade, from 1946 to 1954. Battles occur in valleys, villages, and remote highlands. Yet even during conflict, ordinary life continues wherever it can. Farmers plant crops between shifting front lines. Teachers hold lessons in temporary classrooms. Families carry belongings from village to village, searching for stability. You begin to sense how exhausting prolonged uncertainty can feel, like listening to distant thunder that never fully fades. The conflict reaches its decisive moment at Dien Bien Phu, a remote valley in northwestern Vietnam. French forces establish a fortified base, believing their superior technology and air support will secure victory. But the Viet Minh slowly surround the valley, transporting artillery through jungle terrain in an astonishing logistical effort. You imagine the valley now, ringed by mist-covered hills, quiet before the final storm. Over weeks of intense fighting, the French stronghold collapses. The battle becomes a turning point, signaling the end of French colonial rule in Indochina. In 1954, world powers gather in Switzerland to negotiate peace, an event history will remember as the Geneva Accords. You find yourself seated quietly inside the conference halls of Geneva. Diplomats speak carefully, maps are unfolded, pens hover above documents that will shape millions of lives. The agreements temporarily divide Vietnam along the 17th parallel, creating a northern zone led by Ho Chi Minh's government, and a southern zone supported by Western allies. The division is described as temporary, with national elections planned to reunify the country within 2 years. But for families living along this invisible line, the separation feels immediate, personal, and deeply uncertain. You walk now beside villagers preparing for relocation. Some move north, others move south, carrying belongings tied in cloth bundles. Grandparents embrace grandchildren they may never see again. Boats cross rivers filled with both hope and quiet sorrow. And as the sun sets across the divided land, you feel the ancient rhythm of Vietnam still pulsing beneath everything, the rice fields still reflecting the sky, the rivers still flowing patiently toward the sea. Yet the current has changed. You feel it in the silence between village bells, in the cautious conversations shared at family tables, in the distant presence of foreign advisors arriving quietly into the southern cities. The river continues flowing, but the storm clouds have only begun to gather. You remain beside the river, though something subtle has shifted in the air around you. The moonlight still touches the water with silver calmness, but now you sense a quiet tension beneath the surface, like the river itself has begun carrying whispers from distant capitals and unfamiliar lands. The year is now 1954, and the invisible line drawn across Vietnam at the 17th parallel begins quietly reshaping the lives of millions. You walk slowly along a dusty road that winds through central Vietnam. Ox carts roll gently beside you, their wooden wheels creaking in steady rhythm. Families travel in small clusters, carrying woven baskets filled with rice, cooking pots, family photographs, and ancestral keepsakes. Some families move northward, believing their future will be safer beneath the government led by Ho Chi Minh. Others journey south, drawn by promises of economic opportunity and support from Western allies. Many do not move by choice, but by fear, rumor, or political pressure that drifts across villages like an unseen wind. You notice mothers whispering reassurances to children, fathers walking quietly beside them, their faces calm but heavy with uncertainty. Each step feels like walking between memory and possibility, never fully certain which direction holds peace. The land itself does not recognize the new border. Rivers cross it freely. Birds fly over it without hesitation. Rice fields continue stretching across both sides, glowing emerald beneath the tropical sun. Yet human hearts begin learning what it means to live divided. In the north, the newly established Democratic Republic of Vietnam begins reshaping society under socialist principles. Land reforms are introduced, redistributing farmland from wealthy landowners to peasant farmers. Many villagers experience this as a long-awaited correction, a promise of fairness and dignity. You walk through a northern village where officials gather families beneath tall banyan trees, reading new policies aloud. Farmers listen carefully, some hopeful, some anxious. The land, once controlled by a few, is now being reimagined as belonging to many. In the south, a different transformation unfolds. Supported by American advisors, a new government forms under NGO Din Diem. Urban centers like Saigon grow busier, influenced by Western economic structures and political philosophies. You stroll through Saigon's broad boulevards now, where bicycles glide past French-style cafes. Radios play foreign music softly behind open shop windows. Tailors measure fabrics imported from overseas. The city hums with energy, opportunity, and quiet unease. Diem's government promotes modernization, infrastructure development, and anti-communist policies. American economic assistance begins flowing steadily into southern Vietnam. Schools expand. Roads stretch farther across the countryside. Military training programs begin quietly shaping local defense forces. But beyond the city lights, rural villages experience these changes differently. Government programs sometimes relocate families into fortified settlements designed to separate civilians from communist influence. These strategic hamlets are built with protective fencing and watchtowers, intended to create safety, but often leaving villagers feeling uprooted from ancestral lands. You walk through one such settlement at sunset. Chickens peck softly at the dust. Children chase each other between newly built huts. Elders sit silently, gazing toward distant mountains where their original villages once stood. And as you stand there, you feel how safety and displacement can sometimes exist side by side. Meanwhile, beyond Vietnam's borders, another invisible force begins shaping events, the Cold War. You feel it not as soldiers marching, but as a slow spreading chill across global politics. Two powerful ideological currents flow across the world, one led by the United States and its allies, promoting capitalism and democratic governance, and the other led by the Soviet Union and China, promoting socialist and communist movements. Vietnam becomes one of many places where these competing visions quietly collide. You imagine distant conference rooms in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. Maps are studied. Advisors debate strategy. Leaders speak of containment, influence, and global balance. Yet here in Vietnam, farmers still plant rice beneath the same sun, fishermen still cast nets into the same rivers, and children still chase dragonflies along the edges of lotus ponds. By the late 1950s, tensions between North and South begin quietly intensifying. The planned national elections promised by the Geneva Accords never take place. Distrust deepens between leadership on both sides. In the South, opposition groups begin organizing resistance against Diem's government. Some are motivated by political ideology, others by local grievances, land disputes, or dissatisfaction with government policies. Gradually, these resistance movements merge into what becomes known as the National Liberation Front, often called the Viet Cong by American and South Vietnamese forces. You walk through dense jungle paths where these fighters move silently beneath towering trees. Their uniforms blend into shadows and foliage. They rely on intimate knowledge of terrain, building hidden tunnels, navigating narrow river routes, and receiving support from rural communities sympathetic to their cause. The jungle itself feels alive around you, humid air pressing gently against your skin, cicadas singing in steady, hypnotic waves, leaves dripping slowly after afternoon rainstorms. You begin to sense how war here will not resemble open battlefields seen in other parts of the world. Instead, it will move quietly, unpredictably, like mist drifting through valleys at dawn. As the early 1960s arrive, American involvement deepens gradually, almost cautiously. Military advisors arrive first, assisting South Vietnamese forces with training and strategic planning. Helicopters begin appearing above rice paddies, their rotating blades creating rhythmic thunder across the countryside. You watch villagers pause their work as helicopters pass overhead. Some children wave curiously. Others hide behind parents, unsure whether these flying machines represent protection or something unknown. American soldiers arriving during these early years often find themselves overwhelmed by Vietnam's sensory richness. The air smells of wet earth and tropical blossoms. Rainstorms appear suddenly, drenching landscapes before vanishing into blazing sunlight. The jungle hums constantly with insects, birds, and unseen movement. You walk beside one young soldier standing at the edge of a clearing. He wipes sweat from his brow, listening to distant village sounds he cannot yet understand. In his pocket rests a folded photograph of home, perhaps a suburban street lined with maple trees, or a quiet farmhouse surrounded by wheat fields. He is very far from everything familiar, and he knows it. Back in the United States, public awareness of Vietnam remains limited at first. News reports describe advisory missions, technical assistance, small-scale conflict. Yet gradually, as the decade progresses, television brings images of distant jungle landscapes into American living rooms. Families gather around glowing screens during evening broadcasts. Maps of Southeast Asia appear beside weather forecasts and sports scores. For many viewers, Vietnam feels distant, complicated, difficult to fully comprehend. Meanwhile, in Vietnamese villages, life continues beneath growing military presence. Markets still open each morning. Farmers still lead water buffalo through muddy paddies. Wedding ceremonies still echo with music and celebration, even as uncertainty quietly lingers. You attend one such village wedding now. Lanterns glow warmly across bamboo courtyards. Guests sit cross-legged beside long wooden tables, sharing rice wine and laughter. A young couple bows respectfully to elders, promising loyalty and shared future. And for this evening, the world feels peaceful again. But beyond the lantern light, distant helicopter blades hum faintly across the night sky. By 1963, political unrest within South Vietnam deepens. Protests emerge in cities, including demonstrations by Buddhist monks opposing religious discrimination and government authority. Streets fill with chanting voices, prayer flags, and rows of peaceful protesters sitting quietly beneath scorching sun. This internal strife culminated in a military coup in November 1963, which further destabilized the South Vietnamese government. You stand among them, feeling the stillness of collective determination, the soft rustling of robes in warm wind, the weight of history gathering once more. International attention intensifies. Political alliances shift. Leadership structures tremble beneath internal and external pressure. And through it all, the Jade River continues flowing, carrying reflections of villages, forests, and skies unchanged by human conflict, yet quietly witnessing every transformation. As the mid-1960s approaches, American leadership begins debating a question that will reshape global history. How deeply should they commit to Vietnam? You sense the world holding its breath, like the pause before monsoon rain breaks across dry earth. The horizon grows darker, but the river still moves slowly, patiently, carrying echoes of everything that has come before. You continue walking beside the river, though now the air feels heavier, thick with humidity and the distant vibration of machinery that did not exist here in generations past. The mid-1960s arrive quietly at first, like the first ripple across still water before a stone fully breaks the surface. You find yourself standing along a coastal shoreline as waves roll gently onto sand still warm from afternoon sunlight. Fishing boats sway lazily in the tide. Seagulls circle overhead. Villagers sort their morning catch into woven baskets. Then, beyond the horizon, larger ships begin appearing, steel silhouettes moving slowly through morning mist. Their presence feels steady, deliberate, carrying with them soldiers, equipment, and decisions made thousands of miles away. In 1965, the United States begins deploying large numbers of combat troops into Vietnam. The shift is gradual at first, then increasingly visible, like rainfall that begins as scattered drops before becoming a steady monsoon. You watch as helicopters land in open fields, flattening tall grass beneath their spinning blades. Soldiers step onto unfamiliar soil, boots pressing into earth that feels both welcoming and foreign beneath them. Many of these young men have traveled across oceans for the first time. They carry photographs of parents, sweethearts, children, small reminders of homes filled with ordinary comforts. Some feel pride in serving. Others carry uncertainty that settles quietly behind practiced smiles. You walk beside them as they move through villages lined with palm trees and clay roads. Children approach cautiously, offering shy waves. Some soldiers hand out small candies or chewing gum, gestures of kindness bridging vast cultural distances for brief, fragile moments. Yet the environment itself feels unpredictable. The jungle breathes constantly around you, alive with layered sounds. Cicadas sing in pulsing waves. Birds cry from high branches. Leaves rustle even when no wind moves. The soldiers learn quickly that the jungle is not simply landscape, but living terrain that conceals, reveals, and shifts with silent complexity. You follow a patrol as it moves along narrow jungle trails. Their pace is slow, careful. Each step is measured. The air smells of damp earth and crushed vegetation. Sweat gathers beneath heavy uniforms. Boots sink slightly into mud softened by frequent rainfall. Sometimes the patrol finds nothing, only forest stretching endlessly in every direction. Other times, distant movement, a snapped twig, a brief flash of shadow reminds them how quickly calm can dissolve. Across rural Vietnam, civilians navigate life between opposing forces. Farmers rise before sunrise to tend rice paddies, carefully balancing daily survival with awareness of shifting front lines. Families cook meals quietly, listening for distant echoes of artillery or aircraft that ripple across evening skies. You sit beside one family now inside a small wooden home raised on stilts. A grandmother prepares rice over a charcoal stove, stirring slowly, methodically. Her grandchildren sit nearby, listening to stories she tells softly, stories about harvest festivals, water puppetry performances, and ancient legends where dragons once protected the land. Outside, water buffalo rest lazily in flooded fields, unaware of the human tension surrounding them. You begin to understand how war here rarely announces itself with constant noise. Instead, it arrives unpredictably, interrupting ordinary moments, then retreating again into uneasy silence. Meanwhile, American military strategy focuses on search and destroy missions designed to locate guerrilla fighters hidden within rural regions. Large-scale operations sweep through jungles and villages, relying on technology and mobility. Helicopters become one of the defining sounds of the war. You hear them now, distant at first, then growing louder, blades slicing rhythmically through heavy air. The sound echoes across valleys, startling birds into sudden flight. For many soldiers, helicopters represent safety, evacuation, supply, and rescue. For many villagers, they signal uncertainty, disruption, or fear of impending combat. You stand beside a clearing where helicopters land in a cloud of swirling dust and grass. Medics carefully load injured soldiers onto stretchers. Pilots communicate through headsets filled with static and urgent voices. The scene feels intense, yet strangely quiet in emotional tone, as though everyone moves through practiced routine designed to manage chaos. Back in the United States, the war gradually becomes impossible to ignore. Television broadcasts bring images of Vietnam directly into living rooms across the country. Families watch evening news reports showing jungle landscapes, troop movements, and interviews with soldiers speaking from temporary camps far from home. At first, public opinion remains cautiously supportive. Many Americans believe their country is helping protect South Vietnam from external control. Yet as months turn into years, casualty numbers rise, and questions begin appearing in classrooms, workplaces, and dinner table conversations. You walk now through an American college campus in 1967. Students gather beneath tall oak trees, discussing foreign policy, morality, and generational responsibility. Some carry protest signs painted with bold, emotional messages. Others simply sit in thoughtful silence, unsure how to interpret a war unfolding across oceans. The protest movement grows gradually, then rapidly, like a rising tide. Marches fill city streets. Musicians write songs reflecting confusion, sorrow, and hope for peace. Families experience tension as different generations struggle to understand one another's perspectives. And still, in Vietnam, the river continues flowing beside rice fields where farmers bend gently beneath conical hats, planting, harvesting, surviving. By early 1968, both sides prepare for a turning point that will reshape the emotional landscape of the war. The Tet Offensive arrives during the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, traditionally a time of family gatherings, ancestor worship, and quiet renewal. Villages decorate homes with flowers and banners. Firecrackers burst joyfully across neighborhoods. Families prepare special meals honoring both past and future. You walk through one such celebration now. Lanterns glow softly across narrow streets. Children laugh while elders offer incense at family altars. For a brief moment, joy feels complete, untouched by conflict. Then, as dawn approaches across multiple cities and towns, coordinated attacks begin unfolding simultaneously across South Vietnam. Guerrilla fighters and North Vietnamese forces strike military bases, government buildings, and urban centers including Saigon and Hue. The suddenness of the offensive shocks military planners and political leaders alike. Streets once filled with festival music become filled with confusion and urgency. Soldiers scramble to defend positions. Civilians search for safety while protecting families and neighbors. You move slowly through the ancient city of Hue during these tense days. The Perfume River flows calmly through the city center, reflecting temple rooftops and stone citadels that have witnessed centuries of Vietnamese history. Smoke rises from certain districts, blending with morning fog drifting across the riverbanks. The fighting continues for weeks in some areas. Both sides experience heavy losses. Civilians endure profound disruption as neighborhoods transform into contested zones. Yet militarily, the offensive ultimately fails to hold territory long term. American and South Vietnamese forces regain control of major cities. But emotionally, psychologically, the impact travels far beyond battlefield outcomes. Television images of fighting inside urban centers create a powerful shift in global perception. Many viewers in the United States begin questioning earlier assurances that victory was near. The war now feels longer, more complex, and less predictable than previously believed. You stand now inside an American living room where a family watches news footage in quiet disbelief. The glow of the television reflects across their faces. A mother folds her hands tightly in her lap. A father leans forward, eyes fixed on images of distant streets filled with smoke and sirens. Their teenage son watches silently, sensing the gravity of a conflict that might soon shape his own future. Back in Vietnam, soldiers on both sides continue navigating physical exhaustion and emotional strain. Letters from home become treasured lifelines. Some soldiers read them repeatedly beneath dim flashlight beams during nighttime guard duty. Others write responses slowly, choosing words carefully, trying to describe experiences that feel impossible to fully explain. You sit beside one soldier now as he writes. Crickets sing around him. The jungle hums with nocturnal life. He pauses frequently, staring into darkness, listening to memories forming even as events continue unfolding around him. Across villages, civilians develop remarkable resilience. Families rebuild damaged homes using salvaged wood and bamboo. Markets reopen whenever conditions allow. Teachers gather children beneath temporary shelters to continue lessons, reminding them that knowledge can survive even when buildings cannot. And as you walk through these overlapping worlds, soldier and civilian, jungle and city, celebration and sorrow, you begin to feel how deeply human the war remains beneath every political and military narrative. The river continues flowing beside all of it. You return to its banks now as evening settles gently across the landscape. Fireflies begin appearing above tall grass, blinking softly like distant lanterns guiding travelers through darkness. The water reflects fading sunlight in ripples of amber and gold. You sense the war has reached a moment where certainty dissolves, where momentum shifts invisibly, where the future feels suspended between escalation and exhaustion. And still, the Jade River carries every reflection forward, patient, enduring, whispering memories into the night air as you continue walking beside it. You remain beside the river, though now its surface carries the reflections of a land that feels tired, like a traveler who has walked too far beneath an unrelenting sun. The late 1960s begin to soften into the early 1970s, and you sense something subtle changing within the rhythm of the war. The sounds of helicopters still cross the sky, artillery still echoes across distant valleys, yet beneath these familiar noises, a deeper exhaustion settles across soldiers, civilians, and nations watching from across the ocean. The river flows steadily, but the current feels slower now, heavier, as though it carries years of memory gathered like fallen leaves drifting toward the sea. You walk through a South Vietnamese village at sunrise. The mist lies low across rice paddies, turning the fields into pale silver mirrors. Farmers step into cool water, their reflections bending softly around each planted rice shoot. The world appears peaceful, yet every movement carries quiet awareness. Villagers have learned to measure time differently. They remember which seasons brought heavy rain, which months brought troop rotations, which years brought neighbors who never returned. Children play beside irrigation canals, floating folded paper boats along gentle currents. They laugh freely, though sometimes they pause, listening instinctively for distant engines or sudden thunder that might not come from the sky. As the early 1970s unfold, a new policy begins shaping events, a strategy known as Vietnamization. The plan centers on gradually transferring military responsibility from American forces to South Vietnamese troops, allowing American soldiers to slowly return home. You step into an American military base preparing for transition. Crates are stacked carefully across dusty landing zones. Equipment is inventoried, cleaned, labeled, and prepared for shipment. Soldiers move through their duties with mixed emotions, relief drifting quietly through some, uncertainty lingering within others. One young soldier sits on an overturned supply crate, polishing his boots even though they will soon no longer be needed here. He watches helicopters lifting cargo toward transport aircraft waiting on distant runways. His thoughts wander between memories formed in jungle patrols, friendships built under rain-soaked tents, and the unfamiliar idea of returning to a home that may feel different now. You sense how departure can carry both comfort and sadness, like leaving behind a place that shaped you in ways too complex to explain. Nearby, South Vietnamese soldiers continue intensive training programs. American advisors work closely beside them, sharing tactical knowledge, communication methods, and operational planning techniques. Training grounds fill with the sounds of marching boots, radio drills, and classroom lectures held beneath canvas roofs. You watch as instructors explain navigation techniques using maps spread across wooden tables. Young officers lean forward, tracing rivers and mountain passes with careful fingers, memorizing terrain that will soon become entirely their responsibility. The process feels methodical, structured, yet fragile, like building a bridge across water that never stops moving. Beyond military bases, civilians continue living within landscapes shaped by prolonged uncertainty. Markets reopen each morning, filled with baskets of mango, papaya, herbs, and freshly caught fish. Vendors call softly to customers. Bicycles glide along crowded streets. Tailors stitch uniforms beside wedding garments, blending conflict and celebration into everyday survival. You walk through Saigon again, now a city carrying both energy and tension beneath its bright storefronts and crowded boulevards. Neon signs flicker above cafes serving strong coffee and warm bread. Students gather in universities discussing politics, poetry, and philosophy. Taxi drivers weave through traffic with practiced patience. Yet behind many smiles, you feel the presence of questions that remain unanswered. How long will this fragile balance hold? In the countryside, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces quietly prepare for future offensives. Supply routes known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail stretch across dense jungles and rugged mountains, carrying food, equipment, and reinforcements through terrain that feels almost mythical in its complexity. You follow sections of this trail now, winding through mist-covered hills where porters carry heavy loads along narrow footpaths carved between tangled roots and moss-covered stones. The air smells of wet leaves and mountain rain. Water drips steadily from overhanging branches, creating a slow, hypnotic rhythm that blends footsteps with nature's endless pulse. These supply networks move silently, steadily, like underground streams feeding larger rivers yet to appear. By 1972, tensions rise again as large-scale northern offensives begin testing the strength of South Vietnamese forces now carrying greater responsibility. Battles intensify across several regions. Cities brace for siege conditions. Civilians gather inside reinforced shelters built beneath homes, temples, and public buildings. You sit beside one family inside a small underground shelter carved into packed clay earth. Oil lamps flicker gently, casting warm golden circles across walls decorated with family photographs and ancestor altars relocated carefully underground. A grandmother fans her grandson with a folded palm leaf while humming an old folk melody. The boy leans against her shoulder, listening to distant vibrations muffled by layers of soil above them. His eyes grow heavy, comforted by her steady voice, by the familiar scent of jasmine tea simmering in a small metal kettle beside them. Outside, life continues between moments of disruption. Farmers harvest rice quickly during temporary lulls in fighting. Monks ring temple bells at dawn, their tones drifting across valleys like reminders that spiritual rhythm persists even when human rhythm falters. Across the Pacific, American society continues wrestling with the emotional cost of the war. You walk through a quiet American neighborhood where yellow ribbons appear tied around tree trunks and mailbox posts. Families welcome returning soldiers with embraces filled with relief, yet sometimes followed by long silences where shared understanding feels difficult to express. Veterans step into hometown streets that look unchanged, grocery stores selling the same products, playgrounds echoing with the same laughter, yet something inside them has shifted like landscapes altered by hidden earthquakes. Some veterans gather in community halls, sitting in folding chairs arranged in gentle circles. They share memories slowly, carefully, finding comfort in speaking with others who recognize the invisible weight carried home. By 1973, formal peace negotiations produce agreements designed to end direct American military involvement. Ceasefire terms are signed. Prisoners of war are exchanged. American troop withdrawal accelerates rapidly. You stand beside a long runway where final American aircraft prepare for departure. The engines hum deeply, vibrating through concrete and bone alike. Soldiers board quietly, carrying duffel bags filled with uniforms, letters, photographs, and memories too heavy to pack. One soldier pauses at the aircraft stairs, turning briefly toward the distant jungle horizon. His face holds gratitude, fatigue, and something quieter, perhaps farewell, perhaps unresolved emotion drifting like mist between past and future. The aircraft lifts slowly into pale morning sky, shrinking gradually into the distance until it becomes only a faint silver glimmer against sunlight. And yet, the war within Vietnam has not ended. Over the next 2 years, conflict continues between North and South Vietnamese forces. Without extensive American air and ground support, the balance begins shifting steadily. You walk through South Vietnamese towns where military checkpoints grow busier, where radio broadcasts carry urgent updates, where families listen carefully to rumors traveling faster than official news. Supply shortages begin appearing. Fuel becomes scarce. Government offices operate beneath mounting pressure. Still, schools open each morning. Markets attempt to function. Weddings continue beneath decorated archways built from paper flowers and silk ribbons. Hope and uncertainty live side by side, sharing the same streets. By early 1975, Northern forces launch a major offensive moving steadily southward. City after city falls with surprising speed. Refugees begin filling highways, traveling by bicycle, truck, and foot, carrying bundles filled with clothing, cooking utensils, and carefully wrapped ancestral photographs. You walk beside one such family moving along a crowded rural road. Dust rises gently beneath thousands of footsteps. A father balances a small child across his shoulders. A mother holds tightly to her elderly parent's hand. Chickens cluck nervously inside woven baskets tied to bicycles overloaded with household belongings. The road stretches endlessly ahead, yet no one knows exactly where safety waits. Inside Saigon, tension thickens like heavy summer humidity before rainfall. Government offices work around the clock. Foreign embassies prepare evacuation plans. Radio stations broadcast both reassurance and urgency within the same breath. You wander through Saigon's streets during those final days of April 1975. The city remains strangely vibrant. Cafes still serve coffee, vendors still sell fruit along sidewalks, children still chase each other between parked motorbikes. But conversations grow quieter. Faces glance upward more often. The sky itself seems to hold its breath. Then, on April 30, 1975, Northern forces enter Saigon, marking the end of the war and the reunification of Vietnam. You stand beside the city as history turns its final page. Tanks roll slowly along broad avenues lined with tamarind trees. Government buildings change hands. Radio broadcasts announce the transition. The city remains filled not with celebration or devastation alone, but with a complex stillness, like the moment after a long storm when the air feels cleansed yet uncertain. Families gather inside homes, listening, waiting, embracing one another as decades of conflict dissolve into fragile quiet. And through it all, the Jade River continues flowing. You return to its banks as sunset spreads across the reunited land. The water glows bronze beneath fading sunlight. Fishermen prepare evening nets. Children sit along muddy edges dipping their toes into warm current. Lotus flowers close gently as night approaches, folding their petals like hands preparing for rest. The river carries memories of empire, resistance, separation, return, and survival. It moves forward without hurry, without regret, simply continuing, as rivers always do. On April 25, 1976, the unified nation was formally renamed the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. You sit beside it now, listening to crickets rising in steady evening chorus, feeling warm air settle gently across your shoulders, sensing how history, like water, eventually finds its way toward calm seas after even the longest storms. The land sleeps. The war has ended, but the first decade of peace was marked by challenges. An ineffective planned economy, a Western trade embargo, and conflicts with neighboring countries, including a border war with China in 1979 and involvement in Cambodia, crippled the country's economy. You walk through the countryside as the first years of peace begin to unfold. Villages rebuild homes that once stood before storms of history reshaped them. Wooden beams are lifted into place by hands calloused through labor and resilience. Roofs are woven from palm leaves that rustle softly whenever evening wind passes through them. You notice how rebuilding is not rushed. It happens in small, deliberate gestures. A door repaired. A garden replanted. A fishing boat sanded and painted again. A school roof patched with bamboo and hope. Then, in 1986, the government launched the economic and political reforms known as Doi Moi, renewal. These reforms transformed the country toward a socialist-oriented market economy, facilitating Vietnam's reintegration into the global economy. You step into one rural classroom where children sit cross-legged on woven mats. Their teacher writes carefully across a chalkboard, explaining lessons about language, mathematics, and history. Chalk dust floats through sunlight streaming from open windows, turning into tiny drifting constellations inside the warm air. The children repeat lessons together, their voices rising in steady harmony. Some of them have grandparents who remember colonial rule. Some have parents who remember war. But these children are learning about rivers, poetry, and science, preparing quietly for futures still unwritten. You continue walking through marketplaces reopening across towns and cities. Vendors arrange fruit pyramids glowing with mango, lychee, and dragon fruit. Fabric merchants unroll bolts of silk dyed in deep emerald, crimson, and gold. Street cooks stir simmering broth that fills the air with star anise and lemongrass. The sounds of trade replace the sounds of artillery. The clinking of teacups replaces radio static filled with battle reports. Laughter returns carefully, like sunlight returning after long monsoon clouds. You walk into Saigon, now known as Ho Chi Minh City, where life grows vibrant once again beneath tropical skies. Motorbikes weave through crowded streets. Neon lights glow above restaurants and shops. Students gather inside libraries and universities, studying engineering, medicine, literature, and art. The economy attained a high growth rate during the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The city carries memory, but it also carries motion, energy, resilience. You notice elders sitting in parks beneath tall shade trees. They play board games carved from polished wood, moving pieces slowly while telling stories to grandchildren seated beside them. Their voices hold gentle patience, and sometimes long pauses, where memories float quietly between sentences. Some stories speak about rice harvest festivals long before conflict. Some speak about years spent separated from loved ones. Some stories are spoken openly. Others remain inside the soft silence between words. And across Vietnam, temples and pagodas once again fill with incense and prayer. You enter one such temple where monks walk slowly across stone courtyards warmed by afternoon sun. Prayer bells ring in steady rhythm, their tones echoing across lotus ponds where pink blossoms open and close with the cycle of daylight. Villagers kneel beside ancestral altars, lighting candles and offering fruit, rice, and tea. They bow gently, honoring those who lived before them, those who endured hardship, those who carried memory forward like fragile lanterns through darkness. You begin to understand how healing here is deeply connected to remembrance. Forgetting is not the goal. Remembering gently, honoring quietly, allowing memory to soften rather than harden, this becomes part of national healing. Beyond Vietnam's borders, echoes of the war continue shaping lives across oceans. Veterans sit beside lakes, rivers, and ocean shores in distant countries, sometimes watching water ripple beneath wind while remembering landscapes half a world away. Some veterans find comfort speaking about their experiences. Others carry memories silently, expressing them through painting, music, writing, or quiet walks through nature. Families who lost loved ones gather at memorials where names are carved into stone walls polished smooth by countless fingertips tracing letters across time. Flowers are placed gently at the base of those walls. Some visitors speak softly to the names they touch, as though conversations continue beyond the boundaries of life. History, you realize, does not belong only to nations. It belongs to families, friendships, shared human journeys that cross borders and generations. You return once more to the Jade River as twilight begins its slow arrival. The sky shifts from gold to lavender, then deepens into shades of indigo where early stars appear one by one. The river reflects everything: fishermen drifting home, lanterns glowing across village porches, the silhouette of palm trees swaying against fading sunlight. The current moves with calm confidence, carrying fallen lotus petals and drifting leaves toward distant seas they will never see but will always reach. You sit beside the water, feeling warm earth beneath you. The scent of jasmine drifts faintly through evening air. Fireflies begin appearing again, blinking gently like living stars hovering above tall reeds. The land feels peaceful, but not empty. It feels full, layered, alive with stories whispered through wind and water. You begin to feel your own breathing slow naturally, matching the quiet rhythm of the river beside you. Breathe in slowly, like the river drawing water from distant mountains. And breathe out gently, like the river releasing that water toward the sea. Allow your shoulders to soften, your jaw to relax, your thoughts to drift like leaves floating across calm current. The story you have walked through, from ancient rice fields to colonial shadows, through storms of war, and into gentle rebuilding, now begins to rest beside you like an old memory settling into peaceful silence. The Jade River continues flowing, but you do not need to follow every bend now. You can simply sit beside it, listening, feeling its steady presence carry history forward without effort. In the distance, you hear the soft notes of a bamboo flute once more. The melody rises slowly, each note drifting across water like a lullaby shaped by centuries. The music blends with cricket songs, with the quiet splash of oars, with the whisper of bamboo swaying in warm night wind. Above you, The stars multiply across endless sky. Their reflections shimmer across the river surface, turning water into a mirror filled with constellations both above and below. It becomes difficult to tell where sky ends and river begins, just as memory and dream begin blending gently together. If you have enjoyed walking through this peaceful journey of history, you are always welcome to return here again, to rest beside new rivers, to listen to stories carried across time, to drift through memory and landscape whenever the world feels heavy. But for now, you no longer need to follow the story forward. You can allow it to fade softly into background music, into distant flute notes, into the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Feel your body growing heavier against your resting place. Feel your thoughts floating slower, quieter, softer. Imagine the Jade River flowing steadily through night, carrying lantern reflections, lotus petals, and centuries of whispered memory toward the calm horizon where water meets endless sea. You are safe here, resting beside history that has finally grown quiet. The land sleeps. The river flows.